It's my pleasure to introduce today's panel discussion, which is titled Creative Professionals, Bridging the Income Divide and Canada's Cultural Policy Review. Joining us on stage shortly will be my good pal Graham Henderson, the President and CEO of Music Canada, and again, a tireless advocate for creators across this country. He will be joined in discussing how creators deserve a marketplace that gives them the opportunity to earn a proper living in this country. So he will be joined by Mr. John Degen, who is the Executive Director of the Writers' Union of Canada. John's a longtime partner of Music Canada on issues affecting creators and an outspoken advocate for authors and creators' rights. I became aware of John's work during the last round of copyright reviews, where on top of everything else, I really enjoyed how well he dealt with trolls. On top of everything else, this is a really funny guy. So John will join Graham along with Kate Taylor, who will conduct this entire panel and keep these two guys on track and bring her own insight as a novelist and journalist. Kate is well-versed and often writes on Canadian cultural policy. Some of you may have seen her last year at the CMW Global Forum, which was the survival of the creative class. Obviously a key issue for all of us in this room. So please put your hands together and join welcome our esteemed panel. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. The creative class, we're not dead yet. And we're here to discuss some nitty-gritty issues about copyright, about the cultural policy review that the federal government has promised us. So I wanted to start by bringing John into this right from the start, because you're a music crowd, you know what the challenges your industry is facing. But I thought John could bring us up to speed a little bit on similar but perhaps slightly different issues in publishing and issues for writers.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Thanks, Graham. I have to say, I'm not used to being on stage like this. Where are the armchairs? Where's the orchid? You know what I mean? Yeah. What are those things behind me? Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I guess you need to understand about me is that I'm not just running the Writers' Union of Canada. I'm an author myself. I started out in this professional life writing books and writing for magazines and writing for newspapers. I continue the magazine and newspaper work such as it is these days, and I continue writing books, but I also have a Toronto mortgage. I have two kids who are heading towards university, and you all know what that means. And so there's an economic reality there that I have to deal with, and not just me, but all of my members. I represent 2,000 professional authors of books around across the country, and not just that, but I'm doing something. I've been doing something for the last 2 years where I'm chairing something called the International Authors Forum, and that's sort of an umbrella organization for authors organizations around the world. So there's about 650,000 authors involved in my advocacy now across the world. And what we're finding is that all of the trends that are happening in Canada are happening all around the world to different degrees. And for the most part, it's economically speaking, it's all pretty negative. At the Writers' Union of Canada, we did an income survey last year of our membership to sort of update from an earlier income survey, and what we found was that over the last 20 years or so, even accounting for inflation, authors' incomes have gone down by about 27% in Canada. And not only that, but sort of the conditions under which we work have become increasingly difficult. So authors are reporting that they're having to work much, much harder than they used to have to work in terms of the amount of writing that they do in order to earn that 27% less. I did a presentation on this in New York 2 springs ago, and I had colleagues there from the UK and colleagues there from the US, and we all presented on income surveys that we had done independently of each other. We didn't even know that each was doing this, and we discovered between 27 and 29% decline around the world. So that's where we are right now.
So not a pretty picture, and Graham, I see you nodding your head there, because of course I've often said the musicians were kind of the canary in the coal mine on this one. So the ones who suffered it first. So how did we get here? What do you see as being the real source of the problem?
Well, I mean, obviously, the problem that has been created by the switch to the digital economy has been what we call a value gap. That the remuneration, and this is to John's point of it, the remuneration that creators and also the folks that work with creators, the remuneration has steadily eroded over the past 20 years, so we've got to find a way to address that value gap. I mean, I have a quote from which I wanted to read from Francis Gurry. Francis Gurry is the Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization, and I met with him in Geneva 2 years back, and he asked me, WIPO is sort of famously a gridlocked organization. It has great difficulty making decisions because of the various voices around the table. But he said, is there anything I can do for you? And I said, well, the one thing that you could do for me is we could address the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that creators are worse off today. And that couldn't have been anybody's plan, I hope. He said, well, I'm actually very interested in that. I think that's the myth of the golden age. And he said that there had been a seemingly avoidable and inappropriate loss of value to creators, performers, and the creative sector. And I think that's the key, avoidable. It did not have to be this way.
To play the devil's advocate here for a minute, you know what critics will say, what consumers will say was, hey, come on guys, get with it, digital's here to stay, get with the technology. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think anybody is afraid of technology. It's more addressing what appears to be sort of an imbalance that was created by rules that got set in the mid to late 90s. And when you think about those rules, right, John, they were rules set by, I think, let's say they were well-meaning individuals. Sure. The goal was that the new technology industries needed to have certain advantages in order to thrive, but the promise was, and I think it was an explicit promise, I think it came from the technology industries, I think the media trumpeted, government picked up on it, was that some of the legacy industries, record companies, book publishers, they might disappear, but the key was the creators were going to be better off. So we now find ourselves 20 years later, and that hasn't happened. So I mean, people can point at it and say, I think that's a mischaracterization of what we're saying. We're not saying we don't like technology. We actually love technology, and it's created these enormous opportunities. But the wealth, this is Gurry's point, the wealth is not finding its way to the creative side of the ledger.
So John, you concur with that it's the
same? In my sector, we are early adopters, absolutely. We love technology, and we sort of lead in the use of technology in our work. I mean, my community jumped into blogging before anybody else had heard the word blog. We're all podcasting now. I podcast myself. We have embraced digital enthusiastically. The problem is we have not figured out a way to make a living at it. And when I say make a living, I'm not talking about a hugely fantastic living. I'm talking about sort of a middle class living, and that has proven not just difficult, but I would say impossible for the most part.
So what kind of solutions can we talk about? We see that the government has we finally seem to have a government who's awoken to this issue at least. Are you looking for funding? Is that one solution?
Well, I'm always looking for funding. I will never turn down money or more money into the funding pool. But I think what's very important at this point is we don't get placed into a position where we're being asked to sort of trade our traditional rights for extra money, or to trade a viable marketplace for public funding. Public funding is fantastic, and we appreciate all that comes our way. But we also know that it depends on the government of the day. It can come and it can go, it can grow and it can shrink. And if we get into a position where it's shrinking and we've given up all of our traditional rights under copyright, all our economic and moral rights, then we're in a serious pickle at that point.
Yeah, I was at a round table that was hosted by the ministers, one of the minister's officials and her senior policy advisor, and Jim Vallance, the songwriter, was with us, and he kicked off the entire discussion by saying, yeah, funding, great, but I want a functioning marketplace. And I think the reason that we want a functioning marketplace, so that, and by the way, that pushes the answer over to copyright and the frameworks that exist and direct the flows of money. And one of the reasons why I think this is important, it's fantastic that we have a government in Ottawa that cares about creators, wants to put $1.9 billion into the economy. But if we become completely reliant for, Jim Vallance called it an artificial economy that's reliant on government funding, what happens when a Trump comes along? And we can pretend, well, we're insulated from that, we're not like that, we'll never have a Trump. But why put yourself in that sort of a situation? So, functioning marketplaces, that's the goal.
Okay, so how do we create a functioning marketplace?
Well, I think the first thing we need to address is the consumer expectation of free. The pressure on, I know certainly the history in the music industry is well documented, but it's happening in writing and publishing as well, especially in digital. Authors are now self-publishing an awful lot. That's a growing segment of my sector. But the price point pressure on self-published works online is incredibly heavy, and it's pushing it towards that sort of free point where no one's really making any money. I think copyright here is the key. You may all realize that there was a pretty significant change in 2012 to Canada's Copyright Act that had a significant economic impact on my sector. We're talking about upwards of $30 million per year now that has just sort of disappeared from our sector. And if you have any understanding of the thin margins of writing and publishing in Canada, you'll understand that we can't possibly afford that. We're looking for the federal government to provide some leadership on sort of walking that back and trying to once again
Is that specifically the education
recreate.
exemption
That's the
you're talking about?
education exception, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that people in this room are aware of. This is the education exemption that was placed in the new Copyright Act and has really devastated a lot of textbook publishing and young adult publishing in Canada.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
to the
had
point where companies like Oxford University Press have simply said they're no longer interested in the Canadian market.
That's right. Yeah, we had a licensing structure in place that provided for fantastic access for students to Canadian-produced works. And we are talking about millions of pages of Canadian works that are being copied every year in Canadian K-12 schools and colleges and universities. It is a significant amount of work that is suddenly being copied for free that used to be compensated for. So it's a real issue, and that was a huge step back that we took in 2012. I don't even think that's reflected in the results of our income survey that I talked about. So it's probably even worse at this point. And so we have a steep hill to climb at this point.
So as well as fixing copyright, then there's the issue of this incredible downward pressure on price. And we all hear, I mean, consumers all hear that, streaming artists don't get enough money for streaming. Is there anything we can do about those kind of issues?
Well, part of the problem is that our marketplace is inhibited by the fact that we have an inability to bargain on an equitable basis with some of the intermediaries. So unless our rights are sort of treated as exclusive rights which we get the right to say, no, you can't use that, and if like gigantic actors in the marketplace, intermediaries with trillions of dollars in the bank, get to say, well, we don't like your deal, we don't need your music, and then hide behind safe harbors, which were clearly not intended for that purpose, then it's very difficult to bargain effectively in the marketplace.
So this cultural review, policy review is approaching. Are these issues you can take to Melanie Joly as she launches that?
Yeah, I mean, the question is what do they want from this cultural review? So I was invited to the round table that took place in Toronto last Wednesday. I got my invitation on Tuesday. John, you.
I was on the Facebook Live event.
Right.
Which was a little bit painful.
Right, you didn't, yeah, that's right. But look, that was a very well-run event, and the minister is very clearly staking out some high ground. She asserts a desire to be ambitious. She repeatedly excoriated the group to think out of the box, think big, and referenced sort of previous ministers of heritage or governments that created institutions such as the CBC, the NFB, the CMF, and so on, and the CRTC, and so on and so forth. So clearly, there's a desire to do something epic. Yeah, I know. Well, that sometimes can be an I mean, for us, what would be epic would be a meaningful review of the rules that were put in place in the late 90s and the rules that were put in place in 2012, to take into account this new reality, the reality that we have no middle class, right? It increasingly looks like a lottery. And if you win the lottery, then you win an enormous amount of money, and everybody else is struggling. And I think the question that we have to ask Minister Joly and the government is creation a profession, or do they think it's a hobby? And if you think it's a profession, then we have to stand up for the rights of creators to be paid appropriately. I remember we were sponsors of her economic club speech, and she said all of the right things in that speech. She didn't address the issue of remuneration. And when I alluded to it right at the end... At the
economic club.
Yeah, at the economic club. When I alluded to it at the end, it got this huge roar of applause, because that underlines, and I hope she noticed that underlines that's the issue, right? That's the issue, so that you have enormous pools of money, and that's what Guri's saying. It's accumulating someplace, and it's not accumulating on our side of the ledger. So how do we reverse that?
Yeah, there's a lot that's exciting in the cultural policy review. A lot of the introduction of it, the rhetoric of it around it is very exciting, especially for us, for Canadian authors. The idea of pushing our work into the global marketplace, right. Something that has been very, very difficult over the years. You know, there's this story that goes around in Canadian writing circles. You know, I'd sell your work in New York, but it's too Canadian. And we've been hearing that for a very long time, and we want to get past that. I don't think anybody says that to a Swedish crime writer. You know, I'd sell your work around the world, but it's too dark and brooding and Swedish. That's what we want. Yeah. We want the dark and brooding and Swedish about it. And so we feel the same way about our work. And it would be wonderful if we can be in a position with the government, providing the wind at our backs to get out there into the global marketplace. But what we'd be pushing out there right now is a fairly anemic sector that is economically underadvantaged, and that's a problem.
So in practical terms, I mean, Canada used to have a very strong history of finding ways to get money back to creators, levies, the Canada Council's public lending rights, those kind of programs. And those have really come under attack and never, obviously haven't kept up with inflation or anything. Is there room there for really practical measures?
Well, I think for me, I don't know if I can get into listing the practical measures. For me, it's a philosophical change that has to happen. A big part of the launch of the Cultural Policy Review was a questionnaire, and everyone was asked to answer the questionnaire. Everybody in Canada. But the first question was, are you a creator? So, are you a stakeholder in culture, or are you a consumer of culture? And to me, that's a complete false dichotomy, especially in a place like Canada. I'm both. You're both. Graham is both. I think a lot, almost a majority of the Canadian population would define themselves as both. So creating this sort of false split between the consumer and the creator of Canadian culture, I think, is very damaging to the whole process.
How can we move away from that? Because, we spoke earlier a little bit about the pressure for free. And anybody who works in the creative industries is, we all hear the horror stories, right? I've been talking to booksellers lately, and the story about, booksellers now independent booksellers feel they are showrooms for Amazon. People come into the store, they look around books, they take out their phone, they take a picture of the cover, and then they go buy it on Amazon. And I was talking to a Toronto bookseller recently who told me this anecdote about someone coming in and looking for a children's book, and she runs a children's bookstore. And once the bookseller had found the book and shown it to her, this woman said, no, it's okay, I can get it on Amazon.
Well, you know what I do? I'll tell you what I do. I go online to Amazon, and then I take a screenshot of the book I want, and I email it to my bookseller, Jessica's Book Nook in Thornbury, and they order it for me. And I actually pay a little bit more, but she gives me a 10% discount, and it kind of washes out. So,
but you're an unusual man.
I know, but why can't we all do that?
Why can't we all do that? But I guess the thing that sort of shocked me about that story was this person doesn't understand what's wrong with that. They don't understand that the bookseller isn't going to make a living if she goes off and buys the book on Amazon. And so it's sort of getting at that issue. I wonder how we can tease out that debate and get away from the confrontational aspect of it.
Well, I think that something like Minister Jolie's Cultural Policy Review is a golden opportunity to have exactly that conversation. I hope it goes in that direction. I don't know if I have a whole lot of confidence that so far it is going in that direction. But yeah, we need to have a conversation about a phrase that we throw out all the time, fair trade culture. We need to have a conversation so that consumers, people who would only identify themselves as consumers, understand just what underlies the value of the product that they're buying. Price point rarely reflects the work that has gone into a Canadian authored book. And I really doubt the average Canadian book buyer understands that. We have an opportunity right now to have that national conversation. I hope we manage to insert some of that.
Yeah, so then that means really pushing the government away from that consumer, that definition of consumer versus creator. I mean, I noticed the CRTC, there was a period where the CRTC was always telling us we were consumers. That was all they ever talked about. And they have started to use the word citizen again.
Well, that was the question that we got. It was, and it almost seemed to be pitting creators against citizens, though.
Mm-hmm. So creators aren't citizens.
Well,
yes.
That's right. I mean, that there's this tension that exists between the citizenry and this class over here that creates things.
Yeah. And I think there's a diabolical illogic involved in that, in talking about it that way. The debate we had about the educational exception for copyright, from the educational side, it was all about, won't somebody think of the children? We want to save students money. That was in 2012 they got the educational exception. Is it less expensive to be a student in Canada 4 years later? I'm the parent of 2 students. It's not less
And
expensive.
what
Is
was the
there
proportion of their education that went into that anyway?
Well, exactly. But also, do they have greater access to Canadian works? No, they have less access to Canadian
Yeah, yeah.
works. So I mean, that sort of what was presented as logic, you know, well, the consumer is king, we get them as much access as possible, it actually hasn't worked.
I mean, it does seem to me it's a huge Canadian content issue because we are in publishing terms, a country of the mid-list, not in terms of quality, but in terms of scale. It's a smaller market. And so we'll get hit first, and it's our culture that will disappear. One of the notions of the broken marketplace that I think is useful is that it somehow becomes less adversarial. It shows, well, this is an economic problem, not a cultural clash.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there was something going on behind me there. I totally missed it.
So I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if we can use that sort of notion of the broken marketplace as a way of sort of pulling us back a bit from the adversarial.
Well, also too, I think we have to remember that it's not just like there aren't 2 players here: the creator, the musician creator, and the person who consumed the fan. There aren't just 2. There's an intermediary in the middle. Right, and so for us on the music sector, the international campaign that's going on right now is called the Value Gap campaign, which is focused on this just gigantic gap between how we're remunerated and the amount of money music generates in the marketplace. That money doesn't find its way into the hands of record companies or music publishers or agents or managers or artists. It's being pooled someplace else. And when you look at the stories that emerge around the world, you know, the per stream revenue, you add it up, you know, it's shocking. So you have a huge campaign which is bringing together literally every single artist in the entire United States together, and similarly in Europe, both looking, one to the European Union and the other looking to the US government to address that and to rebalance that. And we have our own version of that we're partnering with John on, that's launching this fall. It's got slightly different nuances, but yeah. From my perspective, and it sort of goes back to how do we take the temperature down on, you know, the citizens versus creators. You know, when I think of how Canadians perceive themselves and identify themselves, I think at the very top of the list would be we see ourselves through the lens of our authors and our songwriters and musicians, and that's a gigantic piece of our national identity. I mean, you look at the Tragically Hip's tour and the final performance and the impact that had on the country. Alice
Munro winning the Nobel Prize.
Right. So I think that when so my thought was, well, why don't we partner on this, and why don't we focus on bringing to the attention of the Canadian public and the Canadian government just what's going on, this elephant that's in the room, because I think there are still an awful lot of people out there that I meet who do subscribe to that idea that somehow, well, everybody's better off, aren't they? Isn't this a golden age for musicians? I thought it was a golden age for writers. I mean, not quite literally.
Sure.
Seriously?
Yeah. And I actually really wonder about the adversarial nature, if it's actually true. We hear it's true. We're told by certain high-profile consumer advocates or self-styled consumer advocates that this is true, that consumers, you know, are resentful of cultural producers because we expect to earn a living from it. That's not in the least bit true with any sort of the consumer sector that I have to deal with all the time. So I talk to student groups, I talk to teacher groups, I talk to library groups all the time, and these people completely understand our perspective. It's really the cost cutters at the top that we're dealing with in any kind of adversarial way. And I think if we isolate them, then we have a better shot at it.
Well, the cost cutters at the top from the point of view of the public sector, and then what Graham's describing obviously is an industry where somebody's making money, whether that's Google or Amazon or
unprecedented amounts.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you both so much. So let's retain some words from that. The value gap, fair trade culture, that seems to be the direction we need to be going. So thank you both so much for your thoughts on it.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
So we're almost at the end of our program. I want to thank both Kate and John for agreeing to be here. As Steve pointed out, Kate had done something for us at the Global Music Forum last year, and I find that she does an absolutely spectacular job, both from last time me watching and this time as an interview subject at getting out the big issues. And John, as Steve said, has always been one of the most passionate and funny and terrific partners. And so we look forward to working with the Writers Union and with John as we move down the road in an effort to influence this cultural review in a way that will benefit the creative class. And I also agree. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. This is, you often hear debates about in economic circles about, well, I don't know why copyright's so important. I mean, we've sort of created all these exceptions, and people are still creating things, so there's no problem with supply. So maybe we're not doing anything wrong. Well, so forget about the supply piece. And this is the theory that musicians, for example, will do it anyway. They'll do it for beer and hugs, which is what one musician said, or they'll do it just because they have to create. To me, the bigger issue as a society is, so people are still creating, even though they're not getting properly paid. What? And that's okay? That's not okay. So whether the supply is not the issue. The issue is how we're treating our creators. And as we look forward to Canada 150, and this is part of the thing I'm thinking. So we've got this cultural review going on. The underpinning of Canada 150 is going to be this orgiastic celebration of our stories, which are told by who? Well, that's right, our creators. And it'll underpin the entire celebration. So I hope that our government wants to steam into Canada 150 with some answers for us, so that our citizenry get the idea that we need to be appropriately remunerated.